I raised the shovel and saw him mark an X on the concrete right where we knew the motion sensors were buried. No one marked there. Not by accident. Not if they wanted to stay alive, Dot. He didn't say a word. Just kept mixing sand and lime. Like he hadn't just signed our death warrant. We'd worked side by side for months. He shared his bread, showed me old tunnel routes, even covered for me once. But that mark, that damn chalk mark, Dot, you couldn't erase it without someone noticing. And if you left it, well, someone was already watching. That was Thursday. By Friday, 2 of my contacts vanished. He showed up on time, smiling, gloves dry, Dot. So if you ever wonder how betrayal starts, for me, it was a white X on wet concrete. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. East Berlin, October 1964. The dust never settled near the wall, only men did. We worked. On the eastern side, 5 blocks from Bernauer Straße. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. The rhythm was predictable. Pour, level, seal. Then again and again. The wall wasn't finished, at least not underneath. That was our job. Fill what was hollow. Or so they thought. My ID said I was Victor Hoffman, born in Jena, trained in masonry. The papers were good, real dirt under the nails. I spoke the dialect. I knew just enough about concrete curing times to make them believe I was a grunt, but I wasn't watching the walls go up. I was studying the blind spots, the dead zones between patrol shifts, the foundation depths near old tram lines, and him, my work partner. They introduced him as Rolf, said he'd come from Leipzig after his brother vanished crossing west. You hear stories like that every week, but the way he told it, it sounded like a memory he was still hiding from. Rolf was quick, with his hands, slower with words. But he knew things no regular builder should have known. He talked about tunnels like old friends, mentioned where they collapsed, who tried to pass, which ones were sealed with water or cement. He described air duct tricks and how sand behaves when you're too close to sewer lines. One morning, he paused by the scaffold and said, "If you're ever digging through clay and it smells like ammonia, stop." That's where Stasi dogs mark collapsed sites. Then he walked off, didn't wait for a response, just tossed me a trowel and pointed to a weak patch near the retaining wall. I didn't ask questions, not aloud, but I started writing them down. Every night, in pencil, on the inside of a matchbox I kept under my cot. Things like, why does he know about ammonia? Who taught him tunnel load limits? What the hell is he doing here, still digging with me, if he's that smart? There was an old radio in the break room, always set to local news. Always just a little too loud. Some days, I'd catch Rolf glancing at it like he was waiting for a password. Then he'd snap out of it and joke about the cement being thicker than party loyalty. One afternoon, we were told to reinforce a stretch just east of the Friedrichstraße overpass. The dirt there had settled oddly, like something had been removed beneath it. I asked casually if they'd run sewer checks. Rolf just shook his head. No need, he said. There's nothing left down there. It caved in '61. That was a red flag. No worker should have known that. Those records were sealed after the incident. And yet, he said it like it was common knowledge. He had a tattoo on his left wrist faded, like it had been burned halfway off. I caught a glimpse once when he rolled up his sleeves. Just 3 letters, muck. I pretended not to notice. That was smart. Later that week, the site manager handed us a transfer order. New task, perimeter leveling near the checkpoint. I knew why. It was where they'd caught 2 students weeks prior, trying to tunnel out through a drainage line. Their families hadn't been seen since. When I looked at Rolf, he just nodded. "That spot's cursed," he said, like he'd buried the ghosts himself. We started early next day. He brought a flask. Not of vodka like the others. Water. Just water. Handed it to me without a word and started hammering at the base. The echo didn't sound right. Too hollow. He stopped mid-swing and looked at me. "Doesn't that sound like someone left in a hurry?" He said, "That night I dreamed the wall fell on top of me, but when I clawed out, it was Rolf waiting on the other side, holding my ID dot, and that was the first time I wondered if he was really here to help anyone get out, or just to watch who tried dot it." Rained for 9 hours straight that Monday. The kind of rain that made the mortar run like soup and turned every glove into a soaked rag. We didn't speak much that day. Just worked under our hoods, boots sinking half an inch into the mud with every step dot by sundown. Our backs were bent like old furniture. Rolf and I took shelter behind the supply shed, where the tarps barely held. He pulled out a chunk of rye, bread dense, dark, wrapped in a strip of cloth, and handed me half. I almost didn't take it, but it was cold, and I was starving. He smiled. Not the kind you give a friend. The kind that says, "Now you owe me something dot," as I unwrapped the cloth. Something slid out creased, soft, slightly oily. A folded napkin. Inside it, drawn in pencil over the texture of a cafe serviette, was an improvised grid. Sewers, maintenance lines, access points. Not just random scribbles. This was a partial map of the underground. He didn't look at me, just bit his piece of bread and chewed slowly, watching the mist roll in over the eastern rooftops. "You ever dream of moving through walls?" he asked, still chewing. I nodded, just once. No use pretending otherwise. That night, back at the lodging house, I copied the grid onto a piece of broken concrete using a carpenter's pencil I'd snapped in half. The cement slab was from an old support beam it let us keep to use as a makeshift stool. Now it was a map table. Over the next weeks, it became a habit. Rolf would slide me fragments, napkins, wrapping paper, even a cigarette carton once, and I'd redraw them onto the concrete. He never explained the sources, just left them in my locker or under the mattress at the site restroom. We didn't speak of the maps out loud. Instead, we pointed at cracks in the floor and made small jokes about drainage routes. "This corner leaks worse than border protocol," he once whispered, tapping the slab. "That's because the protocol was drawn by drunk men with rulers," I answered. He laughed like it meant more than it should have. One morning, he showed up with chalk in his pocket. Said he'd borrowed it from a bored school teacher. Then he started sketching straight on the inside of the supply shed full route, from a trash chute to an old maintenance shaft. "That shaft was sealed in '59, I said. He shrugged. "Only on paper." It was the first time I let myself believe we might actually build a way out, but one of the chalk lines was too long. It extended past the edge of the wallboard. When I tried to erase it, he stopped me. "Leave it," he said. "Sometimes the mistake tells the real story." I didn't like that. Not one bit. Then came the night shift, where a random guard walked by the shed, tapped the wall, and muttered, "Looks like school kids got bored again." He chuckled, walked off. I pretended to laugh. Rolf stayed dead quiet. Later, alone, I scraped off the whole diagram and burned the chalk pieces with a rag soaked in ethanol. Rolf didn't mention it the next day, but he handed me a small square of cardboard with a new sketch, thinner lines, cleaner geometry, fewer assumptions. That week, we started working the North Trench near an old bakery foundation. While inspecting the subfloor, Rolf whispered, "There's a story about this place. Someone made it halfway in '62, left his shoe behind." I asked how he knew. He said, Because it was my brother's. I didn't say anything. I just marked the floor with a pebble. That night, he brought fresh bread still warm. Said it was from a friend. Inside the crust, another napkin, another grid. When I started to wonder, was this still about escape? Or was someone guiding my hand to draw a map I'd never use? The first scratch looked like an accident. Just a shallow groove on the western scaffold, post 3 inches long, diagonal, against the grain of the metal. The kind of thing you'd expect from moving crates in a hurry, but the second one showed up 2 days later. Same size, opposite angle, forming an X. A quieter one. I spotted it while I was pretending to fix the hinge on the tool crate. The welds had rusted through months ago, but no one dared replace it. It hid more than it held. That's when I noticed the third scratch. This one was deeper, horizontal, almost deliberate. Right where the weld met the crossbeam. I didn't tell Rolf, not yet. I just ran my finger along it, casually, and waited to see if he'd react. He didn't. Instead, he lit a cigarette with a flick that was too smooth for a builder. Held the lighter steady, didn't glance over once. That night, I ran my own test. I added a mark of my own, a triangle, etched into the underside of a wooden beam where only someone checking for signals would see it. The next morning, it was gone. Sanded clean dot at lunch, I asked him half-joking if the wind was getting smarter. He smirked. Only if it's being paid to listen. Then he went back to his bread, tearing off chunks like nothing was wrong. I should have pressed him. But IDN single quotes D. The following day, 2 men arrived on site, claiming to inspect the structural integrity of the North Trench. They didn't wear overalls, no tools. Just black coats, briefcases, and those dull eyes that read more than they blinked. One of them brushed past me near the cement mixer and whispered, "You missed a mark." Then kept walking. I confronted Rolf that night behind the shed, voice low, jaw tight. "Something's wrong. West scaffold's marked. And someone's watching." He didn't flinch. "It's nothing. Probably just kids on a dare." But his voice had lost its weight. And his hands usually still were twitching. That same evening, I pretended to sleep in the rest shack and watched through the broken slats in the wall. Around 23 o'clock, Rolf walked out toward the perimeter fence. Off shift. No one should have been there. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stopped next to a guard, spoke softly. Too softly to catch words. The guard didn't draw his weapon. Didn't even straighten his stance. Just nodded once and handed him something. A folded note? A receipt? I couldn't tell. Rolf pocketed it. Walked away. The next morning, he brought coffee. First time ever. Said he had a good contact at the ration post. I asked who. He grinned. Wouldn't be a good contact if I told you, would it? That was when I knew something had shifted. I went back to the scaffold during my break and made a rubbing of the metal post. Under the scratches, there was a groove. A pattern. Letters? Numbers? Couldn't make them out. But someone was using that scaffold as a drop point. Or a warning board. Later, I found a sliver of masking tape near the foundation bucket. The kind used to seal evidence envelopes. Just sitting there, sticky side up, half buried in the dirt. Rolf passed behind me and said, "Some things are better." Left unmeasured. I didn't ask what he meant. He didn't offer to explain. That night, I removed my name tag from my coat. Sewed a fake one in its place. Just in case, because in Berlin, names were the easiest thing to erase. And Rolf had just started calling me brother. It started with a leak. The kind that shouldn't happen in reinforced concrete. We were clearing rubble from an old sub-basement near Bernauer Straße, once a butcher shop, now a storage site for rusting beams and broken crates. That's when we noticed the floor was sweating. Thin droplets pooling near a wall that should have been dry. Rolf pressed his palm to it, waited, then turned to me and said, "There's nothing behind here." I asked how he knew. He just grinned. "Because I don't hear anything coming." Back. We pried it open 3 nights later after hours, when the sight lights flickered like always. The back wall was thinner than the rest. Different mix. Not poured by the same team, maybe not even part of the original structure. We tapped until it cracked. Behind it. Soft clay, untouched. No rebar. No foundations. Just space, vertical, untested, and silent. He drew a quick sketch on a cigarette pack and said, "That's our window. We didn't tell anyone. Just started hauling debris during night shifts. Carefully. 2 buckets at a time, dumped behind old crates or scattered along transport routes. No one asked. No one cared. As long as the quota was met, no one checked what we moved." Rolf built the support frame from scrap he'd hidden weeks prior. The welds were perfect, too perfect. I stared at them once, then asked, "Where'd you learn that?" He shrugged. "Factories. Back home. Factories don't teach this kind of precision." He didn't answer. Just kept welding. By the second week, we had a hole 6 feet long, 4 feet high, angled toward the street. No maps confirmed what was ahead, but the ground stayed dry. The soil stayed soft. We kept digging. Each night, he whistled while working. Always the same tune. Off key. Annoying. I asked once what it was. "Something my mother used when I lied," he said. It helped her hear the truth. The deeper we got, the more he talked. Not about the plan, about the city. Its smells. The way the fog used to roll in from the spree when he was a kid. As if he was carving memory into the dirt. But something was wrong. He started checking the door lock 3 times before we entered. Started carrying a folded cloth in his breast pocket, even when we were covered in mud. And one night, he handed me a paper handwritten, in pencil. "Emergency route," he said. "If things go bad." I read it. Then noticed the signature at the bottom. Not his handwriting. And not a name I recognized. That was the first time I considered whether this tunnel wasn't ours. We'd hit metal by week 4. A buried pipe, corroded but intact. We rerouted. Rolf improvised a U-curve using old steel trays and duct clamps. The kind used in ventilation systems, not construction. Where the hell did he get duct clamps? He laughed when I asked. "Some people collect stamps," he said. The night we broke through to the final section, he brought candles instead of lamps. Said it looked less suspicious if anyone checked from the surface. But when the flame flickered, I saw something. A mark on his sleeve. Faint, like a pressed imprint. Letters again. Off us. I didn't ask. I just kept digging. And when we reached what looked like a drainage grate, I stopped and said, "Should we name it?" He paused. "Why?" "To remember it," I said. He looked at me, dead serious. "Some places aren't meant to be remembered." We left the tunnel unnamed, but that didn't mean it didn't exist. And from that day on, every time he whistled, I listened closer. Because now, I wasn't sure who the song was really for. The lights went out, mid-sentence. I was marking the tunnel wall with a piece of chalk, noting the angle shift near the final bend when everything vanished. Not a flickerful blackout. Candles gone. Generators dead. Not even the hum from upstairs. Just silence, wet air, and 3 seconds of pitch black. When the emergency lamp finally sputtered to life, he wasn't there. I called his name once. No echo. No shuffle of boots. Just dripping water. Water. I checked the ladder intact. Tools untouched. No sign of struggle, but he was gone. 2 minutes later, he came back, calm, wiping his hands with that same folded cloth he always carried. "Power's back," he said, as if nothing had happened. I stared at him, heart hammering in my throat. "Where'd you go?" He shrugged. "Nature." But there was no smell. No dirt on his boots. No sound from the surface dot and the cloth. It was damp dot. We kept working. What else could we do? But the next morning, a drill bit was snapped clean in half. Not dulled, snapped, like someone had wedged it wrong on purpose. I found it near the reinforcement plate, placed carefully, not dropped dot. I showed it to Rolf. He didn't even blink. "Happens," he said. "Metal's tired." I checked the records. That drill bit had 20 hours of use left. And Rolf knew it. Later that day, I asked one of the other workers for a replacement. He said, "Didn't you already get one yesterday?" I hadn't. That evening, I checked my locker. The chalk map was gone. The slab was still there, but scraped clean. I didn't tell anyone. I just took the concrete piece and smashed it in the yard. Claimed I tripped over it. They laughed. Let it go. But I started sleeping with my boots on. A few nights later, I noticed his rhythm had changed. He was slower, deliberate, almost like he was listening more than digging dot. Then came the whispers. Literally, whispers dot down in the tunnel. When we hit the 16th meter, I began hearing faint murmurs. 2, maybe 3 words at a time. Always behind me. Always gone when I turned dot at first. I thought it was the echo of men upstairs. But we were too deep. I checked. Then I stopped checking, because the alternative was worse. Rolf never mentioned them. But I saw it in his eyes. He heard them too. One morning, I asked him if he remembered where his brother was caught. He nodded. Near here. Then paused. But I'm starting to think it wasn't him they were after. I didn't ask what that meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. A few days later, I found a folded napkin near my tools. It wasn't mine. Inside, a set of initials, a date, and a note. "They're watching the watcher." No signature. Just a coffee stain in the same triangular fold Rolf used for our first map. He denied leaving it, laughed, said I needed more sleep. But that night, I heard him hum. Not whistle dot hum dot, and that's when I realized he only hummed when he was lying dot. It was raining again, light, persistent, the kind that made everything feel slower. We had the day off. Officially. Unofficially, I used it to recheck the fallback points, tunnel vents, and escape times. Nothing moved unless I confirmed it twice. Rolf turned 33 that day, or so he claimed. I bought him a gift. Nothing dramatic, just a cheap Soviet-made watch with a built-in compass. Useless in most cities. But in Berlin, direction was everything. Inside, the watch face, right under the compass disc, I'd hidden a microfilm. Tiny, barely visible through the glass, unless you knew what to look for. It held 2 things: our most updated surveillance grid and the adjusted guard rotations. We had 1 window left. He opened the box slowly, smiled. The way he looked at that watch. Too long. Too warm. He said nothing. Just hugged me. Tight. Tighter than usual. Then he whispered, "You didn't have to." But the way he said it, it didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like confirmation. That night, we didn't meet at the tunnel. The next morning, 2 men I knew, casual contacts, both posing as electricians, were arrested. Quietly, no patrol trucks. Just gone. Their lockers were emptied before lunch. No one mentioned them again. Rolf showed up late, said he had a stomach bug. Looked fine. Hands clean. Boots dry. I asked if he heard about the arrests. He nodded. Bad luck. Wrong place, wrong. Whisper. I watched his face. Nothing cracked. Not a twitch. Not a glance. So I waited. 2 days later, I ran a silent check on the watch. The compass was spinning. The microfilm was gone. That meant one of 2 things. He found it and passed it on. Or someone else opened it without him knowing. Both options were bad. I checked with a courier 2 neighborhoods over someone I trusted once, someone who owed me. He confirmed what I feared. The Stasi had updated their internal shifts after the film went missing. Not all the data, just enough to suggest they'd seen it. I confronted Rolf that evening. I didn't accuse him. I just asked, "Did you show the watch to anyone?" He looked me dead in the eye. "No." Then added, "But I wore it. It was a stupid thing to say. Watches don't walk themselves into interrogation rooms." That night, I slept with a screwdriver under my pillow. 2 more contacts went silent that week. I started to doubt everything. The maps, the plans, the mission. And then, just when I was ready to disappear on my own, he handed me something unexpected. A slip of paper, crumpled, damp. Inside, a list of names. Ours included. Some crossed out. Some marked with a red dot. He said, "I didn't want this. They made me choose." I didn't respond. He continued, "You were never supposed to be on the list." That was the last thing he said before walking into the fog. And I stood there, holding a birthday gift that had become a funeral invitation. The message came folded inside a ration coupon. No code, just plain handwriting. "Cease all operations. Immediate risk. Abort excavation. Orders confirmed." Signed with a call sign only used from the western side. Problem was, I never requested extraction. I showed it to Rolf. He read it once, didn't blink, and handed it back. "Maybe they know something we don't," he said. "Or maybe someone's telling them exactly what we're doing." I answered, "We had 2 options. Stop now and pretend none of it existed, or keep digging and find out who blinked first." I chose the second. Rolf didn't protest, but something about the way he picked up his tools, it felt rehearsed. That same day, the tunnel was drier than usual. Too dry. Like someone had been there before us and made sure it was clear. I checked the wire traps. All intact. Except one slightly bent, almost imperceptibly, like it had been lifted with care, then reset. Rolf said it was probably the humidity. I said humidity doesn't move steel. We kept going. Midweek, the guard rotations on the above checkpoint shifted by 15 minutes. Exactly the window we'd planned for. Too perfect. Like someone was trying to reassure us or lure us. I took Rolf aside that night in the old boiler room we used as cover. "Tell me who's giving them our windows." He didn't lie. He didn't stall. He cried, actual tears. He collapsed onto the old bench and shook like he hadn't slept in weeks. "They have my brother's wife," he said. "They made me choose." That word again. Choose. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Are they watching now?" He nodded. "Always." I should have walked away right there, but something in me, pride, stupidity, or just unfinished business kept me rooted. So I told him, "Then we'll give them something to watch." Next day, I began staging signs of collapse in the tunnel. Shaky supports, fake faults, rerouted markings. I made it look like the entire plan was being abandoned. Meanwhile, I started sketching a new route, one I didn't share with him. Not fully. The more detailed I got, the more he relaxed. He stopped checking the door lock 3 times. Stopped whistling. That's how I knew he believed it. One night, he even brought back 2 ration bars black market stuff. He said, "No hard feelings." I accepted one. Left it on the table. Didn't touch it. I spent the next 3 nights building a fake exit chamber, just 5 meters from the real one. Enough for heat signatures. Enough to buy us time. On the 4th night, I left a coded note for the Western contact, confirming a new exit point rail this time. Buried it in the ash bucket behind the bakery. If it worked, we'd move on Friday. If not, well, they'd know what happened by what. DIDN single quotes T. Friday came at shift end. Rolf handed me a matchbox. Inside, a tiny folded napkin. It simply said, "I told them nothing today." He didn't ask forgiveness, he asked for time. And that was when I started to suspect the truth. Not that they were lying, but that I'd helped them do it. It was still dark when I slipped into the shed and opened his coat pocket. I didn't expect to find anything. I just needed to know I could. But there it was, a transmitter. Small, flat, wired into a stitched lining. Not military-issue civilian shell, modified. Signal strength minimal, range maybe a few hundred meters. Enough to catch ambient chatter. Enough to leak anything said near him. He'd been wired for weeks, maybe months. I stood there with the device in my hand, heartbeat steady, colder than I expected. No panic, just a slow calculation. Do I rip it out? Confront him? Run? Instead, I put it back, because if he was feeding them, and maybe I could, feed him. That night, I wrote a new script. I rehearsed it like a stage actor. The maps, the shift plans, the alternative route, all real enough to sound credible, but flawed just enough to mislead. I made sure he was close when I said things I never meant to say. I left notes half erased, coordinates that pointed to nowhere. He read them all, absorbed them like a sponge. Never questioned. I let him believe I still trusted him. Let him think. He was still ahead. Then I gave him a name. A fake one. A Western agent who didn't exist, supposedly waiting near the sewer grate with a teen. I said it twice near the locker, once near the water tank. Loud enough to be picked up. Subtle enough to sound like a mistake. 2 days later, the Stasi raided the wrong entrance. They found nothing. Just bricks and rats. It worked. Rolf didn't say a word, but his smile was thinner after that. The tunnel progressed slower now. Not from fatigue, from tension. He asked fewer questions. Double-checked everything I touched. One night, I brought an old shortwave radio. Side-eyed intercepted something. Played static, let it run. Watched his face. He didn't blink, but he stopped whistling. Then, without warning, he handed me a folded page. From them, he said, inside, a map. A real one, with markings I'd never seen. 3 alternative exits. All confirmed. All viable. I stared at him. Why give me this now? He looked away. Because if they're going to burn me, I'd rather pick where. For a moment, I almost believed him. But I didn't throw away the transmitter. I rewired it, turned it into a loop. A feedback echo that fed the same data back again and again. Enough to keep them chasing shadows. And when I buried the fake maps under the trash bin at checkpoint 9, I knew I'd bought us time. But us didn't mean what it used to, because every time he looked at me after that, it was like he saw someone else, someone who forgave him. And that was my biggest lie. It started quiet. Too quiet for Berlin. No sirens. No boots on gravel. Just fog thick enough to mute the sound of your own breath. I took it as a gift. A warning. Would have been louder. We met at the bakery ruins just before dawn. 3 others joined 2 men from the electrical crew and a woman with a child. She didn't speak. Just clutched the boy like he was the last thing she'd ever carry. Rolf was already there, gloves on, calm as ever. No tools, just a canvas. Bags slung over his shoulder. We moved quick. Down the access shaft, past the 3rd junction. The fake chamber had done its job. Heat readings stayed anchored. The real route was live. 16 meters down, 12 to go. I watched him the whole time. No stumbles, no hesitation. Like he knew the path by heart. But when we hit the final segment, he hesitated. Just for a second. A half-step pause. Then he turned and said, "I'll cover the rear." He always said that. Every drill, every test run. Never meant it. But this time, he stayed behind. The woman was the first through small frame, fast steps. I carried the boy. He didn't cry, just stared wide-eyed like he already understood this wasn't a game. When we reached the final hatch, I pulled the release lever. It jammed, typical. Years of rust in a system designed to fail. I slammed it with a pry bar, twice, and it gave. Surfaced behind the east side train yard wall, shielded by stacked pallets, and a delivery truck left to rot. Air smelled different. Wet wood and engine grease. I turned back, waiting for Rolf. Nothing. 30 seconds. Then 60. I called his name once. That's when the alarm started. Not on our side, on theirs. Sharp, clipped bursts. And floodlights cutting through fog like knives. We ran. By the time we reached the safe house, only 2 of us had made it. Me and the woman. She sat on the floor, rocking slightly. The boy stared out the window like he still wasn't sure if he crossed. I called in the confirmation. Phrase, no response. Then I turned on the radio. Tuning, static, then voices. German, clear. Counter operation successful. 2 apprehended. Possible Western infiltration neutralized. They knew. Down to the minute. The guard rotations. The hatch delay. Even the fake contact point we fed them. They let us think we'd outmaneuvered them. Let us build our route. Use their mole. And then they made their move. I stared at the empty bag Rolf left behind. Inside, the watch I gave him, still ticking, but the compass no longer moved. And for the first time in a year, I didn't know which direction was mine anymore. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the bread truck didn't show up that morning, and the radio wouldn't shut up about a diplomat's birthday. I was sitting in the West Safe House, tuning an old Soviet TV we kept for noise. Most days, it played weather reports and grain quotas. But that day, the screen flickered and locked onto a state channel from the east. I was about to turn it off when I saw his face, standing straight, smiling like a man who'd never knelt in. The mud never whispered code words, never carved maps into the wall of a rat tunnel. The caption called him a hero of the state, infiltrator without flaw. They pinned the medal to his chest, not one of the fake ones. A real commendation Stasi issue, second tier. No posthumous nonsense. He was very much alive. The announcer praised his year-long operation, how he dismantled a foreign sabotage network from the inside, how he ensured the capture of 6 defectors. 6. Not 5, which meant they counted me. I sat there, staring, not blinking, while he shook hands with officers, saluted, and stood behind a podium. He said a few words well rehearsed. Nothing personal, just duty, loyalty, state security. Then the camera pulled back. Behind him stood a wall, plain concrete, unpainted, a worker's handprint, visible near the corner. I knew that print. I left it there in February, when I slipped and caught myself on the beam. He hadn't just walked away. He had brought them back to our tunnel. To my tunnel. That night, I walked 3 blocks without knowing why. Ended up near the old Western checkpoint. Cold wind. Broken lamp. Nothing there, except memory, except guilt, except the face I couldn't unsee, because the man behind the glass wasn't just Rolf. He was the last person I ever trusted with a secret. He wore it like a badge. I shouldn't have gone back. Too risky. Too exposed. Too many eyes still watching the ruins of that sector like they expected ghosts to resurface. But one night, years later, I did. It was late. The streetlights flickered like they were trying to forget. The bakery was gone, flattened after reunification. Just a fenced-off lot now, with weeds taller than memory. But the tunnel. The tunnel was still there. Or part of it. I climbed over the wire mesh with a bent piece of rebar and dropped into what used to be the sublevel. My boots hit soft mud. No echo, just the quiet breath of forgotten soil. I stood in the dark, no flashlight. Let my eyes adjust. Let the cold soak in. Then I heard it. Scrape. Light. Intentional. Like something or someone moved beyond the wall. I held my breath. Pressed my palm against the stone where we'd marked our final. Coordinate dot nothing dot. Then a thump. 1, 2. Silence. I stepped back, looked down, and saw it. A plastic sleeve, half rotted from moisture, sticking out beneath a pile of loose rubble. I pulled it free. Inside, a folded page, waterlogged and crumbling, the ink barely there. 3 words. Not all lies. No signature. No date. Just that. I sat on the edge of the shaft and stared at it until my hands stopped shaking. Was it him? A trick? A leftover? A message meant for someone else? Or maybe it was just the tunnel talking back, spitting out the last thing I never wanted to read. I burned it there, with the match I always kept for emergencies. Watched it curl into ash on the same dirt that once held our escape. And as the wind caught the last piece, I whispered, "If you meant that, you should have said it with your face." Then I climbed back up, slower than before. Because that kind of echo doesn't fade. It follows you, especially when the only person left to hear it is you. The watch still ticks. I keep it in a drawer lined with maps we never used. Some nights, I take it out, turn the crown, listen to that faint mechanical pulse like it's trying to tell me the truth in Morse. The compass doesn't move anymore. The needle's stuck facing west, even when I turn it north. I've opened the casing twice. Nothing. Jammed, no corrosion. Just stillness. Like even it got tired of guessing. I kept the microfilm too, not the real one. The decoy I planted when I realized he'd taken the first. A strip of nonsense data, encoded with just enough pattern to feel authentic. He never figured it out. Or maybe he did, and let it pass. That thought haunts me more than the betrayal, because some days I remember the way he looked at the wall before the first dig. Quiet, focused, like a man who wanted out, not a spy, not a liar, just trapped. Other days, I remember how he flinched when I asked about his brother's name. And then there are days I think it didn't matter what he wanted, that Berlin was the only one deciding who became a traitor. I've had offers since. Interviews, books. A documentary producer once showed up with a briefcase full of money and a smile like a loaded gun. I said no, because there's one thing they never understand. A story like this doesn't belong in headlines. It belongs in the pause before you answer a question that no one should have asked. Sometimes I wear the watch when the fog's heavy. When the wind shifts from the east. Just to feel the weight of it again. And when people ask what it points to, I smile. It doesn't, not anymore. Because that needle stopped moving the day he left me behind, and the silence it left behind, still louder than any truth I've told since. If you made it this far, maybe you were meant to hear this. Subscribe if you want to know what else never made it to the files. And tell me in the comments, did you already know about any of this? Or did I just ruin your sleep?